Hey guys, before we get into today's episode, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to our level 3 courses. Wem and I tried to sit down and do some big swanky radio advert and it's just not us. So I'm just going to chat about it for a minute. So our level 3 training is the same price as some other courses out there where you just get 5 days and you are out the door, do your coursework on your own. Our course is for the same price is 10 days of training. So for our May cohort, that's 5 days. And then we have a bit of a month off to just let that settle. We come back for a weekend, maybe do a bit of camping. Then we have a bit more time off and then we come back for another weekend. With the September group, we do 5 Mondays starting in September. Then we have a bit of a break. Then we come back in the new year and do another 5. So we're really like focusing on building community as we go. We didn't really want to do that like conveyor belt thing. We could be doing, a level 3 course every school holiday, banging them out, off you go. But we don't want to do that. We do Zoom calls throughout the year. We do loads of like cohort, community building sessions and stuff to help people with what they're doing. And that means that we want to do it well rather than doing lots of it. So we're trying to help people do that. And we're also really big on this community aspect. And we found that people not only find the course easier to do in terms of workload, but also easier to do emotionally when they do it with somebody they already know. So to try and encourage that, we're doing a train together kind of offer. So if you and someone else sign up to do the course with us together, we'll give you some money off your course because we found that the success rate is much higher. People are much happier while they're doing the course, and it makes our life easier as tutors because, happy students, motivated students, we're all kind of getting on together. So if you want to be part of a community rather than just being put through a conveyor belt, then have a look at our website. It goes to myforestschooltraining.co.uk. That'll take you to the Children of Forest website, and you can go from there, get your application in, and join our communities. So on with the podcast.
I'm Wem.
And I'm Lewis.
This is the Forest School Podcast.
Let's go!
Hey lovely people, hey waffle listeners, it's just me doing the intro, so I'm singing, cause it's awkward. Hello, I'm here doing this one. This is part 2 of our recordings from the FSA conference. We wanted to give this, it's mainly just one big recording, we wanted to give it its own time and space so that it could be sort of easier to find and easier for people to listen to. So this is the Neurodiversity panel which was held at the conference and was thankfully recorded because neither Wem nor I could make it to be there in person. So we've got the recording as well, which is great for us to listen to. We wanted to share it with you guys to listen to. It was a real highlight of the conference for a lot of people, and it's the first time I've heard of a neurodiversity panel specifically about Forest School being run by a neurodiverse group of leaders and practitioners. So we've got that in there. But before we get there, I'm not going to name this person, but during the conference, multiple times, somebody came up to me and Wem and was like, gonna do Song Wars then. We were like, yeah, maybe. Oh, you should do one about conference. Yeah, maybe we should do one about the conference. So, at that person's harassment requests, I've done a song about the conference. So my conference song, basically, I did a workshop during the couple of days during the weekend about labyrinths and building labyrinths, and it obviously made me think about David Bowie a lot. So I kind of tried to write a thing in the style of David Bowie. But the actual content of it is, Wem and I arrived at 9 o'clock at night on the Friday evening in the pitch black, in the howling wind. Everybody had these huge big Macs or hoods or waterproofs on, and look, call a spade a spade. The Forest School Conference is a place where Wem and I were quite recognisable, so lots of people came up to us and had a good old chat. I reckon I knew about who half of you were. If I didn't refer to you by name, it's a good chance I couldn't see your face because it was dark. I didn't know who you were, and I was just cracking on with it. So this is my Song Wars song that I've done. Wem hasn't done one, so I automatically get a win on the board if anybody's keeping score. This is my song about meeting people in the dark, and then we'll go straight into the neurodiversity panel. So enjoy.
Driving deep in dark and rain, meeting people wearing hoods who look the same to me. Do I know you? Should I know your voice at all? Just not close enough yet. Oh, holy fuck, it's you. How do you do? Heading over to a canteen in the dark. There's quite the selection, but where do I start? But eat cake, every chance you get, eat cake. Even if you're full, eat cake. Ooh. Waking up in winter sun, everyone's become, they look like bum. Where are the loons? Familiar faces walk around. I think I might have seen you last night. I recognize that sound. The day of learning looms ahead. I didn't sleep well in my bed. I need a cure. What is the cure? What is but eat cake! Every chance you get, eat cake. Even if you're full, eat cake. Ooh. But eat cake, eat cake. Every chance you get, eat cake. Even if you're full, eat cake.
Company secretary of the FSA. I'm also one of the directors, and I was here at the start 10 years ago, and then before that within the IOL. I was asked to chair this discussion, and it is a discussion. It's not a debate. It's a discussion, isn't it?
It can be a debate.
It can be a debate apparently.
We're not sure.
Because one of my key interests in Forest School is working with SEND groups, neurodiversity and Forest School really interlinked. There is so much benefit, as we know, within Forest School, that to actually not think about how we use Forest School in neurodiverse communities or with our children or in schools. And I think Andy was talking about citywide. Well, you were saying in there, I only overheard something. We're missing a trick if we don't. Also, just had a little discussion with Sarah down here about future direction that we might go with the FSA about, okay, we've got regional groups. We might actually now start looking into what, from my past career, was called self-organised groups. So we may well be looking at Forest School practitioners, self-organised groups who may be neurodiverse or disabled, or we may go further than that about minority ethnic or LGBT and stuff like that. But that's for future discussions. future discussions. But we're right at the start. It's 10 years now. We're established enough to be able to move forward and think in different ways and try and help not only providing quality forest school for our participants, but also to act for ourselves to ensure that we as practitioners also have the backing and the facilities and the assistance to continue to do our work in a holistic way. So with the knowing that you're not out there on your own. A lot of people like me, I'm independent, I pretty much work on my own. I don't have a set of colleagues in a staff room, and so you can sometimes feel a bit lonely in the field. So here we are with our panel discussion. Most people know here the man on to my left, although it has been said there are not many people to the left of me. But there we go. That's it. There are a few today. So I'm going to pass over to Michael. He and his colleagues here will do their stuff. We've got a series of discussion points. We have an opportunity for a little discussion or questions after each point if you need clarification and stuff like that. And then when we get to the end, it'll be more of an open question and answer forum for everybody to chip in if necessary. That all right?
Yep.
We all okay?
Right.
Actually, I should have done good morning, everyone. Never mind.
But also, one thing to mention before we start is, I think this weekend's been very, very amazing, but then I think everyone has a bit of information overload with so much.
Yeah.
So one thing of what might be helpful, if everyone's okay with trying it, is, of course, everyone's come here with a reason or something they want to get out of it. So maybe if we can spend 2 minutes thinking about what brought you to this panel, if there's any particular young people you're thinking about, write their name down or think about the challenges they're facing. Then as we go through, if there's anything that sort of connects with that person, maybe just write them down. But then if you still have any unanswered thoughts or questions in relation to that person or the discussion as a whole, then just feel free to ask them, and we'd love to answer those as well. Does that sound okay?
Cool.
Have you got a couple of minutes to think about
Doesn't
that?
have to be a young person, could be an old person.
Yeah,
someone
sorry.
could-
Or could be a group of people. So, and if you do feel the need to get up and fidget about, please do. But then your forest school people, you're going to. So there we are. So
Right, guys, I'm very, very excited about the discussion we're going to have today. The three panellists who've been good enough to come to talk to us all are three people who always teach me a lot. Just ongoing, I learn so much from the three people who are going to share their experiences and their knowledge with us today, and I'm really excited to get going. So first of all, what I'd like to ask each of our panellists is if you could just introduce yourself and please say how you first became interested in forest school.
Okay. My name is Stefania. I come from Italy, and I might start saying that in Italy we don't speak about forest school, but we talk about forest pedagogy, and the reason for this is that we want to emphasize that behind our practice there is a whole pedagogical vision, a specific vision of childhood, of learning and society that deserved to be emphasized and appreciated. And also we don't say forest school because we think that forest pedagogy can be practiced both within and outside of schools, and also that we have to be very clear that the role of adults within the framework of forest pedagogy are very different from the role of adults in schools. So like I will speak about forest pedagogy, but for what I'm observing and learning in this day, during this day, I think the practice is very, very similar, even if the name is different. And so before encountering forest pedagogy, I was doing something very different. I was researching gender and migration and race in university. And then I became a mom and my priorities changed. And then I was looking for something for my children, like an educational context that could really meet their needs. And this is the moment in which I encountered forest pedagogy. It was 2015 in Italy, and it was really something new because it started being something visible in the year before. So everything was really new and very experimental. And at a certain point I joined a self-organized forest kindergarten by families. And the reason for which I went there was that I found that there was a lot of attention to children and a lot of instruments to observe children. I was coming from the university, and I found that the way in which children were observed really had a lot of methodological rigor, and this was something that was really fascinating and interesting. Also, what I liked, and probably the reason for which I stick there, was that there was a lot of flexibility in the way children's needs were met. So, adults were really quick and ready to change the setting, the materials, the way of communicating, the way of organizing to really respond to children's needs. And it has been in the woods that I discovered that I'm autistic and ADHD, and then my children are neurodivergent too. And I don't think this happened for a chance, but it's really because in forest pedagogy based project there is a lot of space to discover yourself and develop your own led strategies to respond to your needs, and so the variety of human beings can emerge. And at the same time there is what Sarah Dyte was talking about this morning. It's really a bottom-up process, so every session and every context is different because it really responds to the need of the people who are there in that specific context. So that's the reason for which I'm here, and I think that my objective in the last 3 years has been to make visible the inclusive potentials of forest pedagogy in Italy with a special attention to neurodiversity. And I think here I'm learning a lot because it has been developed both for a school and attention to neurodiversity some time before that in Italy. So here I can see possible futures, and I'm collecting a lot of tools. Thanks.
So I've been sort of interested in forest school for a long time. I grew up attending forest school camps, which is a completely separate thing, but it's also child-centered outdoor learning, which developed from a literal forest school in a forest, which closed because World War II came along, but the people who ran it kept on organising camps, and I attended those since I was a kid, and then for quite a few years into adulthood, although I haven't been for a while. And I've met various people who do forest school camps who have also been in forest school, so it's sort of been in the back of my head for a long time to learn more about it and potentially get involved. But specifically, Michael actually shared a bit of writing that I've done on his Autism and Forest School Facebook page, and I sent him a message and we got chatting about it, and that sort of led to a series of conversations with people from the FSA about neurodiversity at Forest School, and sort of Autism and Forest School Discord discussions as well. Last year I just did my level 1 training, except that I'm in Scotland, so it's level 5. It's SCQF level 5, which was great, but I would have liked more time actually outdoors. We only had 2 outdoors days. I think the whole thing's been made a little bit weird by COVID, and I think I'm going off topic there. I'll hand over to Sam.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I'm Andy, I'm autistic, and the way I got into forest school, I guess it starts quite a long time ago, because like I said, I struggled quite a lot sort of growing up, because it always feels like there's set ways to be and you have to try and fit in and sort of be like everyone, and then no matter how hard I tried to do that, it never ever worked. And it got to a point where I was about 20 and I went through a massive burnout and really struggled, but then I struggled so much at that time I wanted to try and make sure as many young people as possible avoid the struggles sort of my generation and previous generations have faced. So I just started reading everything I could about autism, and one of the books which I bought from Waterstones was Michael's book. It was just on the front, like as a display thing to pick up, and I thought, oh, that looks cool. Never heard about Forest School before, and I just fell in love with it after reading it. So I messaged Michael on LinkedIn. A few months later, we ended up speaking at the Forest School conference together 3 years ago, and just being there, I just felt completely inspired by everyone, because there's so many people who have recognised things like flaws with the education system and other practices, and then seeing Forest School as a place that really works, and I saw that myself. Whereas in most places, like for example in school, where you have to sit still, really uncomfortable all day, in Forest School it's okay to be different, and it's okay to climb trees or do things to meet your needs. And yeah, as time went on, I actually set up a charity called Spectrum Gaming. So we started 2 years ago. It's an online community for autistic young people that mainly focuses on gaming, but we also believe in face-to-face connection as well. And because I love Forest School so much, we set up a Forest School. So interestingly, I'm not actually qualified as a leader yet, so we pay someone to facilitate the sessions, but then I'm a bit cheeky and then I actually run them. So we've been running them for 2 years. For autistic young people, we have one group who are 12 and under and one who is 12 to 17, and it's just the greatest thing ever. There's some young people who come to our sessions and it's the only thing they actually do outside of a home. Part of that is because Forest School really, really works when it's done right, and I firmly believe that. And the other thing as well is because we're online, young people can meet other people with shared interests and they make that real connection, and then they're motivated to meet each other in an environment that works, which is Forest School. So we're based in Manchester, and there's people who've travelled from Newcastle. Someone once travelled from Dorset, and it took them 9 hours to get to our Forest School session. But yeah, that's me.
Thank you. So before we go into the real meat of our discussion this morning, we should probably define our terms. Would somebody like to define neurodiversity?
So neurodiversity is an aspect of biodiversity. It's the way that brains vary, or really, we talk about brains. It includes the neuro is in there, but really we're talking about ways of thinking and experiencing and being, more than actual neurological differences, which are still largely obscure despite decades of research on what makes autistic or ADHD or dyslexic brains different. So it's the recognition that people think and process and experience the world differently from each other. And it seems kind of obvious when you put it like that, but people persistently act as if it's not true. And they just assume that if something is easy for them, then it's going to be easy for someone else. If something's obvious to them, then it's going to be obvious to someone else. And neurodiversity is also, of course, a major aspect of the diversity of humankind. So neurominorities face many of the same stresses and barriers that other minorities face, and related stigma and prejudice, a lot of which is sort of hidden because people don't like to think that they're discriminating against autistic people or other disabled people, but discriminating against people who are just weird is widely seen as totally socially acceptable. I'm currently wearing a weird pride badge, and I'm quite serious about that. Like, people need to own their weirdness, and there can be no acceptance of neurodivergent people without acceptance of weirdness. One of the things that's quite appealing about Forest School is that I think it attracts quite a lot of quite weird people. So I'm appreciating that about this weekend. I could say more. Do you think that's a good place to stop?
Does everyone feel okay with that? Does anyone want any clarification or anything?
Actually, I should maybe add a little bit about disability there, because I mentioned disabled people. Occasionally people misunderstand neurodiversity as sort of saying that autistic people, for example, aren't really disabled. We typically are in this society. Disability is always the product of how someone is relative to the society that they're in, the social environment, the expectations that people have on them, the barriers that are in place. So neurodiversity is sort of founded in the social model of disability. But it is true that a big part of the idea of neurodiversity is saying that it's okay that different brains work differently and different people experience the world differently, even if it's sometimes very difficult for the people whose brains work differently, or the people who are, around them one way or another. But just as an ecosystem is richer and more resilient if it's biodiverse, the humankind is much more, powerful and potent because it's neurodiverse, and the existence of people who view things very differently is essentially a very positive thing, even if sometimes on the individual level it can be quite challenging.
And I think just one extra thing to add on to that, if that's okay, is I think, like you said, with a social model of disability, you face a lot of barriers because of how society is set up, and that then means if you're neurodivergent, you're rarely just neurodivergent. So there's an example of this research that shows people with ADHD receive about 20,000 more negative comments about them by the age of 12. So imagine the impact that has on your well-being. When you're autistic, you're normally referred and assessed for diagnosis when you're struggling or when you're at crisis point. So at that time, you're not just autistic, you also have anxiety, traits of depression, traits of trauma, and then you have to recover from all of those things to then go on to live a life as a happy autistic person. And so you don't always have the level, well, I don't think, it's very, very rare that anyone ever has a level playing field where you can be a happy neurodivergent person who's accepted as you are. You often have to recover from and fight a lot to find a place where you're able to be yourself.
Yeah. Actually, if I could respond to that, people are often very wary of labels, and there's good reason for that. Labels can be reductive; they can lead people to have lowered expectations, and sometimes people might just think of someone as like, the autistic guy, when there's just as much diversity in the autistic population as there is in the rest of the population. But having a name for something is an incredibly powerful thing, and it's not like the choice is labels or no labels. The choice is like specific labels like autistic or ADHD or dyslexic, or labels like weird. Like personally, I'm fine with being described as weird. I came to terms with the fact that I am quite weird at the age of about 9, and then I realised that all the most interesting people are quite weird. So fine, yeah, I am. But for a lot of people, it's still, it's received as an insult. We're lazy, stupid, slow, naughty. None of these labels explain anything very much, but they're very frequently applied to neurodivergent kids. And having a bit more understanding of the underlying cognitive differences can lead you to realise that there's not really such a thing as laziness. It doesn't explain anything. If people are naughty, it's usually because their needs aren't being met.
Brilliant. That's really. So we're going to go more into the meat of how all of this relates to Forest School now. So we talk a lot at Forest School about nature connection. I just wanted to ask our panel, do you think that there's any difference in nature connection between different neurotypes? If there is, in what ways do you think that might be?
I will start responding this, and I start again making like a specification about language. Like in Italy, we do not, or at least a sector of the forest pedagogy community does not speak about nature connection, but prefers to speak about immersion in wild settings. And this is because of two reasons, like to emphasize that we do not need to be connected to nature because we are already nature, and but there is value in being in wild setting because wild setting have a certain specificity, and that is they are not organized especially around the human needs, and so that allows children and really any person to experience the interconnectedness, interdependencies and limits that there are among humans, other beings and natural processes. And this is what children get to experience, and we call this experience immersion because like in forest school there is a certain continuity in time, and that is very important, but also because it's an experience that is really embodied, that you do with all your body and all your senses, and that is very important because everyone is unique, as Fergus was saying, like the spectrum of human beings. We perceive the world in different ways, so our immersion in wild setting cannot be decided beforehand how it will go, and it depends on how we are made. And here it comes the issue about different neurotypes. I think that for neurodivergent people, being immersed in wild setting is a unique experience as for everyone else, but it presents some specificity, and these are that there are sometimes unexpected reaction because of our atypical sensory profile, and so the way in which we react to the environment is simply culturally unexpected. And this is very significant because it shows us two things. First, that the relationship within the more than human world are something complex, so they are not just pleasant, they can be pleasant and unpleasant, like familiar and unforeseen, fascinating and threatening. And this is something we need to accept, because if we idealize nature to convince people to join our projects, then they will find out that what we said was not really specific and true. And also, what I think the experience of neurodivergent people in nature and within the more than human world make visible is that we have parts of ourselves that we can get to know only in wild setting, because our intense reactions and sensations and emotions are something that help us to know novel aspects of ourselves and to have a more granular view of how we react and how we perceive the world. And so this is valid for everyone, but neurodivergent people with their experience make this more visible, and that is something that I think everyone can take for themselves.
Yeah, there's quite a lot in there. So, by definition, if people experience the world differently, then they experience the natural world differently. For me, as an autistic person, I think I tend to notice details that a lot of people miss, and I think that's a very common autistic experience. I often have quite intense experiences of things that I'm focusing on. So there's something about sort of losing yourself in aspects of the world, and I think especially the natural world, which everyone can do, but it's a kind of thing that maybe comes more naturally or more easily to a lot of autistic people. Also, for a lot of autistic people, and I think this goes for other neurodivergent people to some degree, the human world tends to be quite chaotic and stressful. Most autistic people have very high levels of anxiety, and the natural world, as you know, is almost uniquely calming. You know, it's grounding, it's an opportunity to switch off from the stresses of day-to-day life at school or at work or whatever. So that's really important. I think I also want to say something about sort of the relationship between neurodiversity and biodiversity again, because I think when your brain works differently from the brains of those around you, people misinterpret you. They fail to understand what you're feeling. So there's something in there about recognizing that that's happening with other animals and other species as well, that most people just don't seem to recognize their pain and suffering. So it seems like a lot more neurodivergent people are vegetarian or vegan than the population at large, and I think that's significant and interesting.
So when we've discuss the possible differences. What does a panel think neurotypical people should know to help to better facilitate the kind of connections that you're discussing?
I only had one thing I wanted to mention here, which is the word why. I think often you're always told what to do and how to do things, but I can give you a direct example of why one of my old bosses hated me. So I used to work at a local authority as an advocate for send young people, and she always said what I should do, but then because my brain worked differently to her, it never really worked. So the key thing which I taught her is give me a reason why. Tell me what outcome you want and why you want it to be done. And then I'm able to use my own way of thinking to come to a conclusion. And sometimes what I came up with was actually better than her original ideas. But I don't know, whenever someone tells me what I have to do, I instinctively have a negative response to it, and it's really, really difficult. And I'm thinking about this in relation to forest school, and there's a couple of things I'm thinking about. One is a big barrier for a lot of autistic people in particular to forest school is clothing, because often people say you have to wear waterproofs and wear wellies and that sort of stuff. If people see me, I've been wearing Crocs most of the weekend, and I'm still alive even when it was the storm on Friday. But you learn by experience. If you wear something that doesn't work out, you get really wet, and then if it's not worth it, then you can put on waterproofs next time. You can learn through experience and through exploring why and learning for yourself, rather than people expecting me to automatically know what's best. The other mistake I made on Friday is whenever I go down south, it's always really, really hot. So I was in a hammock and I slept in shorts and a t-shirt, and it was absolutely bloody freezing. And it took me 3 hours to warm up for the next morning. But now what I've learned is, actually, I should wrap up sometimes as well. But naturally, I feel much more comfortable wearing really comfortable things. So sometimes parents think I set a bad example at forest school when I'm wearing shorts and a t-shirt when it's really cold. But if that's what makes you comfortable enough to actually go and attend, then I think that's okay as well. I think that was the main thing. But yeah, the final thing to mention on that is when it comes to the why over what, there's other things like the log circle, which I talk about quite a lot. So in our forest school, we don't use a log circle at the start of sessions, which I know most people do. The reason for that is a lot of our young people really struggle to sit still long enough to actually be able to access it. So why do you use it? People often use it to welcome everyone to the session and to explain the safety rules and that sort of stuff. So I share this with our young people. People often have a log circle to explain the rules of a session and to introduce each other. So then they just said, why don't we just share it in advance? So now we have a written guide that we send to everyone before they go to a session that says the safety rules. It has one-page profiles of all our staff so they get to know them. It says what equipment we bring in, what activities are available. We send it all in advance. We don't need the log circle anymore, and it's more inclusive and more people can access it. So yeah, if you focus on the why, there's always solutions which might be different to what you're used to doing. And if you're willing to be flexible and open to change, that's the best way to meet the needs of neurodivergent young people.
Has anyone got any questions about that bit or would like to say anything?
Run over there.
I don't have any questions, it's just nice to have a validation. And also coming in the way we work is that, and you just saying I do a family forest school, and just people seem to just turn up, maybe because of the way we work. I'd say most are neurodiverse, even if it's not declared, just working, and having that flexibility. I know it drove somebody that was running my session for me. It took him quite a long while, and he's used to working with neurodivergent people, to not have that formal, not even a formal, but that come in and everything. It's just like, and it's home ed, and people just drift in and out. But just touching on, and we've got a WhatsApp group, and just WhatsApp a few messages of the key things people need to know before they come in and things like that. And it's quite nice. To be on the right track, really.
I think following on from that a little bit is the massive irony that I constantly see if you take a step back from a situation that an autistic person or their family are asking for some kind of flexibility within the system that they're in, and then being told we can't do that, we can't be, this absolute rigidity from the institution or whoever that they're dealing with. However, it's the autistic person who, in their diagnosis, has rigidity and inflexibility as part of their diagnosis, right? So always be aware that, are you being flexible, or are you being the person who's actually rigid and inflexible? So there's lots of different theories about autism, and if you kind of go through, when I've gone through them to try to get some insight and develop my practice and my understanding, there's little bits and lots of them which have been useful. There's one theory about autism which for me I think everybody should know, but certainly everybody running forest school sessions needs to be aware of, and that's monotropism. We're very lucky to have Fergus as the man to talk about monotropism, so we're very lucky to have Fergus to explain to us what monotropism is and what its practical implications would be for us working with our groups.
So, monotropism is the idea that autistic minds or autistic brains tend to focus our processing resources on a relatively small number of things at a time. So mostly we're talking about attention, but probably not just attention. So we tend to miss things outside of our attention tunnel. We tend to intensely experience things within our attention tunnel, and switching attention from one thing to another takes time and energy and can be quite uncomfortable. So it's like you're sort of withdrawing your attention, you're moving it over there, and that takes time. Where neurotypical people quite often seem to expect that they can just interrupt someone who's in the middle of something and get them to do something else immediately. What's going on? So it's worth relating that to the idea of flow states, which probably many of you are aware of. You know, it's the idea that of sort of being in the zone, like being in flow, where, you know, one thing follows naturally from another, and you're sort of like, usually you're exercising a skill, and it's like slightly challenging, but it's not too challenging, and you can kind of like lose track of time, lose yourself in it. Something similar happens when people are reading or like watching sports, actually, to a point, even though it's kind of flow states by proxy, I think. So that experience of being wrenched out of an attention tunnel is actually quite familiar to anyone who's like had to stop reading their book a couple of pages before the end of a really compelling chapter, or they've been pulled away from a sports game 10 minutes before the end, or whatever. But that like autistic people tend to have that experience multiple times a day, particularly autistic kids. So monotropism stands out as a theory of autism for a couple of reasons. One, it's developed by autistic people, including my mum, who started writing and presenting about it 30 years ago, although she didn't realise that she was autistic herself for a good few years after that. Also, it explains more than any other autism theory. Like, the idea of theory of mind, I mean, for one, autistic people don't lack theory of mind, and we don't lack empathy. People who experience the world very differently from each other have difficulty empathising with each other. That should be kind of obvious, really, but Damien Milton, the autistic scholar, has been hammering the idea of the double empathy problem, the two-way empathy problem, really, it should be called, for years. And autism researchers keep on acting as if autistic people have an empathy deficit. No, like, different experiences of the world just make empathy kind of difficult. The empathy is not as easy as people think. It's not magical. It's not like most people just can sense the emotions of those around them and some people can't. That's absolutely not how it works. If you ask anyone from any minority, actually, how well they think people from the dominant segments of society understand and empathise with them, I think you'll find it's not very well. And that whole sort of framing of autism in those terms just doesn't at all address what's sometimes called executive functioning difficulties. Difficulties getting things done and like controlling your attention and that kind of thing. Or our sensory differences. So autistic people have difficulty filtering out things. And we, as I say, we tend to experience things quite intensely when our attention is on them, and we tend to miss things outside of that. So it's quite common for autistic kids to be mistaken for deaf kids because they're just not registering things outside of where their attention is pointed. Executive functioning is another way of looking at autism and ADHD. There's like a suite of cognitive functions to do with controlling attention and keeping track of things and getting things done, which autistic people do tend to struggle with, as do ADHDers. But it's not across the board. It's not like we lack executive function entirely. It's that our executive functioning is more monotropic. Our attention tends to be intense and difficult to shift, and we tend to be worse at keeping track of things which aren't in our immediate attention. So things which drop out of my attention tunnel, I tend to forget about. Things that I don't see, I'm not reminded of, I lose track of. So the lens of monotropism explains social differences of autistic people. So one thing is that most people communicate in a very multi-channel way, where they expect you to listen to their words and their tone of voice and read their facial expressions and watch their body language and keep in mind the social relations, like the power balance between you, and keep in mind all kinds of like social context, and they expect you to be doing the same at them all the time. So that's like 12-ish channels. That's too many. The more we practice, the easier it gets. But this is why autistic people often fail to interpret tone of voice or body language or facial expressions. There's just too much to keep track of. If we don't have to keep track of someone's words, we're often quite good at reading facial expressions. But that kind of the communication breakdowns that follow from that difference in expectation and sort of difference in salience between autistic and non-autistic people has all kinds of knock-on effects where we're used to not being understood. And we get used to misunderstanding other people as well, and it's often quite difficult to get a handle on what's happening there. Like, either we don't know that we're autistic as kids, or we have autism explained badly to us as kids, because autism's almost always explained badly. Like I was saying, all of the dominant autism theories are just not very good. There are tons of things they don't explain, and they're all framed in terms of deficits, things that are supposed to be wrong with autistic people. Where monotropism is not. It's a different attentional style, a different cognitive style, and it's got advantages and it's got disadvantages. Being able to get into flow states is incredibly valuable and powerful. Noticing things that other people miss, also incredibly powerful. But getting sucked into flow states when you're supposed to be doing something else is really not, unhelpful, and something that teachers tend to find incredibly annoying. And we miss just as much that other people see as we see that other people miss, if you see what I mean. So this is one of the reasons why neurodiversity is specifically is very valuable, because different people miss different things. So if you've got a bunch of people approaching a problem from really different angles, then you see things that otherwise you wouldn't. I'm reminded of what Sarah Knight was saying in her talk just now about how in order to study Forest School, you really should be looking at it with multiple lenses at once, and talking to people who have a really different perspective on it. I was actually very struck by how much of what she was saying there applies to autism research as well, which has traditionally been in the domain of psychology, but actually it's sociology, anthropology, literature. All of these lenses bring valuable things to bear on understanding.
So I've kind of got a question. So we talk a lot at Forest School about meeting someone where they are. What would your tips be, or your ideas about meeting someone with a monotropic mind where they are? How would that relate?
I'd say for one thing, it's all the more important because if you're not meeting someone where they are and they're monotropically focused on something, then like you might as well be an alien slapping them around the face. You need to get into the habit of entering people's attention tunnels, basically. You know, it's traumatic to be pulled out of attention tunnels, and it's disorienting, it's destabilizing. So this is one of the reasons why autistic people tend to have very high levels of anxiety and stress, that we're constantly being pulled out of what we're focusing on. So yeah, try and recognize where someone's attention is and what their interests are. So much more than for other people, although again this is one of these things which is true for everybody, understanding what someone's interests are is vitally important for working with or living with or being friends with autistic people. I think Leah had a question.
Yeah, so in my experiences as a neurodivergent person who has quite a lot of really complex work in my job, where I might have to be writing all day long or responding to crises all day long, I've tried to find different ways of managing that so it doesn't become overwhelming for me, or I don't just get completely burnt out at the end of the day and get a migraine. And a lot of people have said to me, oh, use the Pomodoro method or whatever it's called, where you set a timer for 25 minutes and then you take a break for 5 minutes and then you do that 3 times and then you take a break for 15 minutes or whatever. And on the one hand, I'm yeah, that kind of makes sense because then I'm not staring at a computer screen for 5 hours, and that's probably good for my eyes and probably good for my well-being. But on the other hand, then I'm constantly okay, I have 10 minutes left to do that. Okay, I really could use a break right now, but I just need to keep working for how do you balance that? I'm guessing it's probably neurotypical people who that works for them to split up their day like that, but how do you balance that? I don't want to burn myself out by doing by really getting hyper focused on this thing that's already really stressful, and then it becoming really overstimulating and overwhelming versus, not disrupting that attention tunnel and then being completely disoriented or not actually being able to engage with it. And I'm sure that a lot of young people that access forest school sessions have a similar, you get so intensely involved in something that actually kind of becomes overwhelming and overstimulating, and then you come out feeling whoa, I just need to go to sleep, How do you balance that? Have you found any?
It's a difficult one. Jamie and Lion, who used to work for the BBC and does a podcast for them called 1800 Seconds on Autism? How many seconds are there in half an hour? That number anyway. He talks about tunnels, not tasks. So he structures his day around getting into attention tunnels for a reasonable period of time, rather than having a task list that he tries to check off every time. He knows that if he's in the right kind of frame of mind and the right environment, he will just get loads of stuff done.
There's a really good Facebook group called Neurodivergent Life Hacks.
Yeah,
it's the best thing ever. Yeah. So there's little things for me, if when I wake up, I have something on my mind that I have to work on. If there's something else I have to do, then one of the little things that works for me is I walk to a local cafe, and then that gives me the time to sort of move from one tunnel into another, and then I start working on it at a cafe, for example, for half an hour, and then when I walk home, I'm then able to fully focus on that one thing. So it's a bit inconvenient having to do that whenever you want to change from one thing to another, but that's just one thing that works for me personally. But there's loads of little things like that. I think the environment you're in also plays a huge role as well. So it's one of those things that you learn in school that sounds really stupid, but having different rooms to work on different things. So if I'm If I need to do something really, really important, like writing a report, I'll go to a cafe, go home and finish it. If I need to create a new idea or do some problem solving, I'll get a notebook and a pen and go on a walk around the woods. And you have like different environments and work on different things. I found really helpful personally as well. Yeah, but yeah, using timers and stuff has never, ever worked. So yeah.
I'm Mimi, ADHD, autistic, and there was a question about how to support those who are neurodivergent. My experience has been more about how people experience me, and because some typical criteria are written down over the years that have been added on. One in particular would be eye contact. Well, I really very much enjoy looking in people's eyes. I can spend my whole day reading your face. I love faces. If I haven't come up to you and touched your face, then I haven't really experienced you. So my parents were stuck in a very rigid idea of what autism was. It was a brain scan that I had, and I'm missing a bit, and my brain, 2 parts of my brain are too close together. So that was a neurodivergent assessment. But yeah, I think it's about knowing specifically what each individual, all individual, and unique, what that person, how they're experiencing it. Just because I'm not expressing my ADHD, perhaps like really out there, causing trouble. Yeah, it's almost like, oh, it's maybe just a smidge autism. And then so my internal struggle, so I might actually be experiencing anxiety really quietly, and I shut down. Yeah, I think it's an understanding of the experience of autism that needs to be talked about a bit more. I've worked with lots of children who are neurodivergent, and their experience is like vastly different, and you're probably all adapting to different people all the time. And I notice a lack of sympathy. The boy that might leave the circle and go, do what he needs to do to listen. And then another person who's having a very quiet anxiety issue. It's all different, and the attention's always on the bigger. And I think supporting those people with autism, whether you're a facilitator or a supporter, in your team, or a child you're working with, it's recognising all that autism isn't like a smidge, or you don't have like a lot. It's like you've got it. That comes up a lot. Parents with or children on the spectrum. Oh, but we've all got it. We've all got a little bit of it. Yeah. Like, okay, you might not be seeing it today, but you actually see me in the woods. Like, come home. And then you'll see a completely different girl.
I always say
those comments like.
I was going to say you can have a bad back and feel sick, but that doesn't make you pregnant. Not everyone has big autism, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're autistic. But yeah.
Do you think monotropism is the new name for autism?
That's a good question. Not exactly. Yeah, it's complicated. So, autism has been defined from the outside, right? It's other people looking at autistic people and saying, "Oh, I see that you do the same thing a lot, and you misunderstand people," or whatever. So, it's quite possible that there are autistic people who are not monotropic, in the sense that they meet the diagnostic criteria for autism for completely different reasons, because those criteria are entirely external. It's also quite possible that there are monotropic people who don't meet the criteria, because, for example, they're very interested in people from an early age. So the things in the diagnostic manuals which are about like social communication and so on just don't apply, because that happens to be where their interests went. Also, so this relates to what Mimi was saying about the idea that you can be a bit autistic, and aren't we all a bit autistic? I do think that monotropism exists on a continuum. So some people are more monotropic than others without necessarily being autistic. It's also interesting that ADHDers tend to be monotropic as well, which I think wasn't obvious. I was quite surprised when I wrote a piece for The Psychologist magazine in 2018, Me and Monotropism, a United Theory of Autism, and a lot of ADHDers came to me and said, "It just sounds like you're talking about ADHD." Like, what? Oh. And recent research is suggesting that yes, people with ADHD tend to be significantly more monotropic than the rest of the population, and autistic people who also qualify for an ADHD diagnosis are more monotropic than the autistic people who don't. And it's a little bit counterintuitive because ADHD is associated with like hopping attention from one place to another. And I think that's probably the big difference, is like that kind of motility of attention, like how easy it is to shift your attention. But ADHD comes with many of the same things of like losing track of things that aren't in front of you, and struggling to keep track of multiple things at once. So it may be that in the future monotropism will replace autism as a diagnostic category, but it's not quite exactly the same thing as autism.
I have two extra things to say, if that's okay. So on the thing that you said about autism not being the same for everyone, I think one difficult thing is, I think the diagnostic criteria for autism measures a struggling autistic person rather than what autism actually is.
Yeah.
And one thing that I think about is when you go for an assessment, the things we typically look for is how many meltdowns does someone have. Actually, meltdowns are an unhappy person. If you're happy, you're not going to be having meltdowns. There's other things like autistic people preferring to be alone all the time. That might be true for some people. It's true for everyone. Some people like being on their own a lot of the time. But for some people, the reason it appears that way is because they've been mistreated or bullied or judged so much that you lose any hope in actually being able to make meaningful friendships. And there's other things as well, which autistic people will know about, a sort of social hangover, where it can take so much to interact with people that you then need a lot of time to sort of recover afterwards. And again, like you said, you can be different in different environments. When I'm at home, I barely interact with anyone. There's 2 cafes that I go to. I always sit in the same seat and order the same thing, and they know me for that. The only places where I'm different is in spaces with other autistic people, because we understand each other very well, or places with a shared interest. I'm absolutely in love with forest schools, so I've really enjoyed connecting with everyone here. In the normal world, just going about my day-to-day life, I actually tend to avoid people because I find them quite anxiety-provoking. So if you saw me on the street where I live, I'd be very different than I am here, because it's a different environment. Yeah.
Can I relate that to the idea of introverts and extroverts? Because people have the idea that introversion is a property of a person, and some people get energy from being around other people and some people don't, and that I don't think that's really how it works at all. Certainly I've known quite a lot of autistic people who, once they meet a bunch of other autistic people, it turns out they really like being around people, and like they're quite extroverted. Because being around people who expect you to not stim or like to not express yourself in autistic ways is exhausting. Being around people who don't have those expectations is not. I mean, it still can be, but
yeah. Sorry, one more thing on that. So like the Myers-Briggs personality test or something. Yep. When a few young people first joined our online community, they did the test, and most of them showed it was like 80% plus introverted. Then the day before I came here, everyone said, "Oh, let's do the test again." But they've been together for a year in a space with autistic people, where they now have meaningful autistic friendships. Each one of them was actually the majority extroverted rather than introverted, because now they're basing their experience around socialising with autistic people and people with their shared interests rather than the general population. So I just thought that was really,
the
really
Myers-Briggs introverted and extroverted test doesn't test introversion and extroversion in the way we understand it. It's more about how you replenish your energy in an introverted or extroverted way. So that's just something that I always mention with introversion. Psychology. It's not about whether you're an introverted or extroverted person. It's about how you renew your internal energy. So,
but that turns out to vary a lot depending on who you're around.
Of course. Yeah.
I just had a question. It made me think a lot about different things young people have said to me. One of them is someone who's going through the process of perhaps being diagnosed, who's in a really, quite a good position, and feels that the words he actually said to me were, if I'm diagnosed, thinks it's got ADHD, if I'm diagnosed, I don't think I'll try as hard. Something about in a school setting, I don't know if I'm going to try as hard because there'll be a reason for it. And it's just really complex, I think, that because some of the diagnosis process can feel, I totally agree, very negative. If you're a person who's functioning in quite a good way, but you're really aware of some of the difficulties, it might feel really negative to go down that. And I think some of the things I've heard from you, particularly Fergus, when you talked about actually the diagnosis means that you might have some positives coming from it, where the negatives of you're weird, you're lazy, you're this, you're that, is really helpful. I just wonder how we can help as practitioners in education. I'm thinking, how can we help newly diagnosed people more with that process right at the beginning of maybe seeing it as a positive rather than a negative? Made me think about an article I read recently about comedians. Many of them had ADHD, and it said, "This is the perfect job for us," was the heading. Somehow I'm just really feeling that we need to do a lot about that initial diagnosis and how that can either make you grow or can make you slump at the end.
I mean, as it stands, the diagnosis process is horrible. It's exclusively negatively framed, and they usually don't do anything to put you in touch with other people who have similar experiences, and that's really key. Like for me, I didn't really even do very much with the knowledge that I was autistic until I started meeting a lot more autistic people, and realising how much I could learn about how to exist in the world, and what accommodations are useful, or what kind of adjustments to my life might reduce my sensory stress and so on. It's about how it's framed, because all neurological differences have pluses as well as minuses, and how realising your neurotype can help you to understand the barriers that you faced and how to overcome them, and connect with people with similar experiences.
Can I just add to that?
Sorry, we're very conscious of the time. Michael and the panel have got quite a lot of other issues and ideas to go through. We've really just scratched the surface at the moment, so I'm going to have to close down the questions until we get to the end, and then with the hold your general questions, make a note of it, try and memorise it, and then we'll come back to it. I'm sorry if that seems a bit harsh, but we'd like to get through it, wouldn't we?
Doing a good David Dimbleby.
Thank you. Right, go for it, Michael.
So, we're talking about the issues that we're raising and the changes that maybe need to be made in the attitudes in the institutions sometimes that we work in. At Forest School, we're in a really good position to really start at the beginning. And one of the things that is really key for me, I think, is to start to rethink how we recognise and think about play. So it's such a fundamental part of Forest School. Autistic ways of playing are often seen as a symptom rather than as in the positive way that other children's playing is seen. So I was wondering if we could think about how monotropism can challenge this attitude, and what other tools may challenge this attitude, please.
Okay, that is one of my special interests, the way in which autistic and ADHD children play. And I must say that I started to explore this topic working with the early years, and I don't think that is a chance, because like the early years are rightly considered a period of life that is key for future development and well-being, and also like children who are so little, they do not express their needs in a way that is easily comprehensible to us, and so there are a lot of discourses about this period of life, including discourses about which are the right and wrong ways of playing. And this is particularly relevant to autistic children because they play in a way that is unexpected, but it can be relevant to any child who plays in a way that is divergent from social expectations. So I will speak about autistic children play because it's what I've researched about, but this is a topic that can be explored further. And I think every one of you has encountered this type of discourses in which the way in which autistic children play is a little bit stigmatized. They are seen as doing very repetitive, restricted, purposeless way of playing, and sometimes their play is even discouraged in therapeutic settings. And this has very important effects on autistic children because having the adults around you understanding and having pleasure in joining and engaging your way of playing is not something that just gives you some fun in the moment, but it's very important because it's the opportunity for you when you are very little to be seen and accepted for what you are. So it's very important to develop tools that can help practitioners to really understand how children play and why they do this, like the important thing of asking why that Andy was talking about. And last year I did an independent research project. I interviewed practitioners who work in the early years and at the level of primary school in Italy in forest pedagogy based projects which are alternative to mainstream school. And I found out a lot of interesting things about how forest pedagogy can be very inclusive, but one point that I find very important to address is that several practitioners reported to find difficult to connect to autistic children and to understand their play. And so I think we really need tools to help people building these connections. And I find that monotropism is a theory that can really serve this objective. And thanks to Michael, and I don't know if you know it, the Discord group Autism and Forest School, I get to know the theory of the ludic cycle, which is a theory that gives you categories to identify different stages of play. And this serves to help adults, practitioners to understand children's play without interfering into it. And so, because it focuses on stages of play, I think it's very useful to bring into focus differences in play and especially in the temporal dimension of play. So I use this, in my research, I used these categories to analyze the pedagogical documentation of the kindergarten where I worked, and I find out something that could have been found out even without this research, that is that autistic children have very clear time preferences. So for example, the ideas in their mind for their play is always or often connected to their special interests and specific memories they have, often connected to places or objects or people. And then they explore play theme for a very long time. They research their play theme through repetitions, which they repeat things, but these repetitions are not always the same. So this allows variation and to explore things. And then their play flow usually lasts at length. So this is very important to bring into focus because when you do not see this and when children do not see these preferences about themselves, misunderstanding and frustration can happen. For example, I could witness many cases in which autistic children were very frustrated because their neurotypical peers didn't want to play with them for a long time on the same topic. And because they didn't have the category to explain this difference in preferences in dispositions, then what they did was to assume that something was wrong with them. And instead, if you have the words and the theories, like with monotropism, to explain these differences, and then you legitimize the fact that there are different predispositions, and then people can develop a better understanding of themselves and better acceptance. So then I want to make another example, because I think we need many tools. So it's very important to know monotropism and go in depth about it, but also to have more tools at our disposal. And the second tool that I think is very important to have to support autistic children in their play is to read a lot about the life experiences and play experience of autistic adults and neurodivergent adults, because I think it would be very interesting if we could neurodiversify our theories of spontaneous play. And so we can do this if we can collect experiences from neurodivergent adults and create something like an inventory, a catalog of experiences that can enrich the tools that we already have. For example, in Italy we use a lot the Hughes classification of spontaneous play that describe different types of play, and also it can be used to clarify their functions, the skills they develop, but also the benefits that children get from their perspective doing different types of play. And so I want to make an example thinking about exploratory play. This type of play is defined as a way to know the world around you and to see which effect you can have on the world around you. And example of exploratory play can be manipulating natural material like mud, or going into an unknown parts of the woods to get to know it, like in an adventure, an expedition, or for example observing the body of a dead animal. And these are all examples of exploratory play that are very concrete, like you are exploring objects, materials, bodies. But then you can think about exploratory play also as a play in which you explore ideas and categories, and that is something that autistic children often like. And for example, lining up objects is a way actually to know the world around you. For example, think about a child who is really into animals and who likes to line up toys representing animals. It is very interesting if you stop to observe which are the categories that the child is using to lining up objects. Sometimes it's color, sometimes it's dimension, sometimes it's the habitat in which the animal lives, sometimes it's the role in the food chain that the animal is playing. So there are a lot of categories, and sometimes very often special interests are seen as something that close, that are very restrictive, but you can see them in a completely different way as interests that open you to the world, because going into a topic allows you to make a lot of association. So recognizing these things and applying them to the theories we already have about play, and so neurodiversifying them, I think is something that could really help practitioner to do two things: to get interested in what the children are doing, to understand what they are doing so that they can support the interest of children, like proposing new materials, new information, new way of communicating about those interests. And so, well, I finished. That was my part.
That was really interesting. Any questions?
Is there somewhere, so my biggest difficulty is my local borough's autism specialist. So she's my biggest stumbling block, because the play that she's looking for is not the play that is being displayed, and it probably isn't, maybe one day, but it isn't. So is there somewhere that we can access your research to share and go, right,
I am one article that is not very academic, but that I published on the Forest School Association website is available in English. And then I started writing, but still I haven't published. But I think there are professionals who have another view, and then maybe I can send you some address of like websites and all of this. But also I think it's a very common sense discourse that we can make. Like all children in the present moment find themselves to have their time organized, often structured around adults' needs. This happens even more for neurodivergent and disabled children, because then they have therapy commitments and then they have to do this and that. And I think we can argue that Forest School is a space where they do something different, and it's fine to do something different. Like, we don't need necessarily to argue with specialists about their way of understanding play, but just to develop a common sense discourse.
I absolutely agree with that. That the only issue is that we are that child's nursery placement, so they are with us. They are not doing any other nursery. So we're not like, once a week you're coming to Forest School and you can, it's different here. This is a 5-day a week. This is your child's nursery placement, and I'm not going to get into it. It's going down a rabbit hole, and I could so easily do that. But if you've got any signposts, that would be really helpful.
It's a big thing, and it's a very early stage of this idea of neurodiversifying play.
Yeah.
Potentially in the Forest School community is somewhere where we'll be open to doing that and to those ideas. Other places aren't necessarily even aware of those ideas yet. But I think you can see, just if you put the pieces together from what we've discussed so far, how important that is in making the changes which will benefit all of us, really, because neurodiversity is everybody. It's not just neurodivergent people. We're all neurodiverse. That's what it means. It's all of us. But we can see how we can actually create those kind of pedagogies which are going to be more accepting of people, and also we're probably looking a little bit as we move on about the really good long-term outcomes if from the time someone's very small, if they do something different, we move away from this kind of stigmatising labels at that stage, not just for them but also for the children around them, to see actually it's okay, this isn't weird play, this isn't strange, this isn't something we should be scared of or be dismissive of. This is somebody having fun and learning in a way that suits their neurology.
I'm really passionate about play, and so we have play-based learning community, and you find yourself having to justify the benefit of play, but everybody needs play, from here to a 99-year-old person. We all learn through play. So quite often I find myself, well, what have we done today? And then when you reflect on the play, all that learning that's gone on, and equally we have a very mixed group of children that all enjoy each other's company, and it's really interesting to see somebody that you would label as neurodivergent, very clearly neurodivergent, sparking play for those that are probably not, I couldn't say yes or no, but come in with very academic focus and have to lose all those shackles of I've got to write something down, and they enjoy the game that neurodivergent child has in the ways you've described. They just add something. It's very creative, and two children are allowed to play and not have those barriers. They just enjoy play in the moment and line up the animals.
I wonder whether actually with if there was just really good quality sort of play learning provision, where you allow for schematic learning, where you've got abundance of materials and that opportunity for children just to have the time to play, which is what, like you say, all children, that's a fantastic model to have, but we don't have that, do we? So, and because we've got these prescribed types of play, then it's really alienating anybody with any sorts of differences or the way that they play is different to those children, because it's noticeable, because it's kind of, you've got to play in that certain way, but actually what all children need is to be able to play freely with
play in
loose
their own
materials
way.
in their own way. Yeah, and maybe it in an ideal world it wouldn't be such a big ask to add in the extra provision required, because we're already halfway there with the provision, but we've got to go, in a lot of places we've got to go so far, haven't we, from this very prescribed play, in nurseries particularly, I'm thinking.
Can I just say about, like I've encountered like a 14-year-old that absolutely adored the mud kitchen, and I got an email from staff saying, the school sends them saying, we've heard that Chris has been in the mud kitchen and this is not age appropriate, and it was like, but the levels that he was doing, he was making up spells, he was just, and also I was so impressed with the other children of a similar age that they just totally accepted that Chris was down in the mud kitchen again doing potions, and they were fine with it. And then I got this, so I felt they were really worried about it being age appropriate and not good for him to be doing that sort of thing that they associated with something that a 3-year-old would do, but he was doing it in his own way, in a very, very creative way.
Can I just say that the whole idea of age appropriateness is absolute poison for neurodiversity.
Absolutely.
Stage
about schemas, because I was thinking about you saying the example of lining up. Obviously, we'd know that as a trajectory schema, for example. So, what would you say about that? Would you say that looking at schema theory would give non-neurotypical children kind of like a channel to do that in an acceptable way? Or are we saying that sort of if they have a tendency to choose that schema, it might indicate something different? Because I was just thinking, when you were talking about the lining up and the and the sort of the honing in, that is a classic early years child schema in the sort of that framework. So how does that link into what we're saying here?
I'm not sure I understood your question, but I will try to answer, and then if I'm out of place, you tell me. Like, first of all, like, lining up objects can be a lot of things. Like, I started from the idea of exploratory play that is taught in a way that doesn't include some plays that are often made by autistic children. But lining up objects can be done for other reasons, like can be a form of creative play because you like the aesthetical way in which you put in line objects. So, like, lining up objects can be many things, also for autistic children.
We'll take that one and then we've got to move on
I
again.
will be really quick. It's really interesting when you hear the voice of a 4-year-old, because what they do is you stand back and the head teacher will come along and say, "Oh, how was Forest School today?" And the first thing the child said was, "Why? Why do you want to know how Forest School was today? What is it that you want? What do you want me to?" She knew the game. She knew that she
What
was
answer
supposed
do you
to
want?
say
Yeah.
an answer.
Yeah.
So I had to step even further back because I said, "It's you say what you want to say." She said, "Well, I took my shoes off."
Yep.
That was it.
Yep.
And that's kind of where we are. That's it. That was enough for her at 4. Which, by the way, isn't this great that this is happening? These diagnoses are happening early, so that child has that vocabulary to then be able to express themselves. It's really key, and I think I'm so excited by this. I'm just so encouraged. I'm almost in tears at what you're doing here. It's just beautiful. Thank you for coming here. Thank you.
So we are going to move on because we've got
to.
I think everyone on the panel, we could all probably quite happily talk to you about this, possibly for days, but we're going to try. I'm going to kind of squeeze 2 together now, if that's all right with everybody. So, what are your thoughts about learner-led pedagogy for neurodivergent learners? And also, what are the key things that you think that Forest School practitioners should know about supporting neurodivergent learners?
I'm going to go first. And I think when it comes to being learner-led, it isn't just about when you're at the session allowing a young person to do what they like to, or person. I think it starts much earlier than that. I think for me there's a few key things. One thing which I did, which of course is unrealistic for a lot of people, is I applied for some funding to run our forest school, and then went on a Zoom call with some young people who wanted to come, and then we designed the space together. So we designed what equipment to get, we designed where the safe space is going to be, we decided what swings we're going to get and things like that. And one of the reasons for this, I think something that's really, really important is the process is often more important than the outcome. So you can think that you know the perfect setup and things to put into place, but actually having a foundation of trust and mutual respect is much more important. So if you work in partnership with young people and then create something which might not be as good as what you could have made on your own, it's trumped by the respect and trust that you then gain from doing that. And so having that learner-led partnership approach is really, really important. I think another thing for me that I think about a lot is, does it really count as being learner-led if you're not willing to adopt your practice based on what people say? Again, going back to the log circle and other things I said, I think being able to change your practice based on what young people say is really, really difficult, because first of all, if you've got things wrong, that means that you might have feelings of sort of shame or guilt related with, okay, I've done something wrong, but now we can fix it, and it's quite difficult for you to accept that. And the other thing as well is, if you're really passionate about what you do and really believe in it, it's great to feel good while you're doing it. But I believe in what's called creative discomfort, which is where when you're learning with young people and you're working in partnership, there's always things you can change or do differently. So, and it's really uncomfortable to have that all the time when you're changing, but that short-term discomfort leads to much bigger benefits in the long term. And our community, I guess, is sort of an example. So in our forest school, about 80% of the young people struggle to access school. When people are in school, people often have like 2-to-1 staff or full to 1 staff. There's only ever been 2 times when a young person's had a meltdown when we've been at our session, and one of them was because of the weather, because it was supposed to be sunny all day and it was raining, and I was, I was very mad about that. But I think the reason for that is because we come in ready to change and be flexible and admit when we're wrong. So being able to work in partnership with young people, apologising when you get things wrong, and then working together moving forward, I think that's what being learner-led truly means, in addition to meeting people when we come to the session. So if someone's really stressed, being able to just lay in a hammock the whole time, that's okay. For some of our young people, they just want to walk around and observe what everyone else is doing, and that's really meaningful for them. So I think both of them is needed to be truly learner-led, but yeah.
I guess the first thing to say is that there's no inclusion without flexibility. Working with neurodiverse groups means different people have different needs. And in a sense, everyone has the same needs. You know, we all need to be fed and sheltered and comfortable. But what it takes to meet those needs varies from person to person. You know, we sometimes talk about special needs or additional needs, and that's in some ways a wildly unhelpful framing, because it's all just human needs. But the specifics vary greatly from person to person. Some people just have their needs met really easily in this society. Like, that is why some people are not disabled, because society is just set up to meet their needs. So that's one thing. Like, because neurodivergent people have different needs, they need to be able to express them and have them met. That's basically it. And we need to help them in that process as well, because people don't necessarily know what they need. There's a lot about play, again, like exploration of what works and what doesn't, what helps and what doesn't. And then, of course, going back to montropism again, being able to pursue what interests you is deeply satisfying, and often impossible in, for example, mainstream education, where we don't let kids lead their own education. You know, we don't let their interests take them where they will. And one other thing that I'd add is that, again, going back to the anxiety thing, the fact that a lot of neurodivergent people spend a lot of their time being very anxious. One key way to deal with anxiety is to feel in control of the situation. Like, this is one of the reasons why autistic people stim a lot, because it's controllable inputs, like, you know, the self-stimulatory behaviours, for those who aren't familiar with the term stimming. It's stimulation that we are in control of in a world which often feels out of control and unpredictable. So that opportunity to, you know, to have an internal locus of control, to be in charge of what you're doing with your own time, can be a blissful respite from a world which tends to feel out of control and actually often is objectively out of control. We tend to give autistic kids and other disabled and neurodivergent kids less control over their own lives, even while they need more control than other people in order to feel safe.
Any questions about the idea of learner-led pedagogy?
Our setting is self-directed, democratic, learner-led, all of those, and I spend a lot of time filling in the forms that I get sent from the various different agencies who are assessing the children that come through, and I always have to preface what we do and say we don't see the things that you may see in mainstream setting or other environments because of the way we work. We can see that would happen, and sometimes they may have happened, and we'll adapt how we're working. But yeah, I'm all for, you know, it happens.
Can I ask you, do you get told by outside agencies, this child does this, and this, when they're, you know, when we've observed them or whatever, and then they come into your setting and you sit there and you watch and you go, am I looking at the wrong child?
Even because I don't work in mainstream now, even when I had a very good head and Forest School was allowed to work in a very true way and never have problems, even with the tricky children, they didn't run, they were just, because they felt, I think it's really important that they have a voice and autonomy and
space
to do and be the best they can be that's authentic to them.
In their own time and space. It was interesting what Andy said, you'd only had one meltdown in your sessions. I can't actually remember the last time somebody lost it, you know. But
I think we failed one child.
Right.
But we didn't fail, I think, because even what we could give was setting them up to fail because it was too noisy, too far. It didn't fit with them. But generally,
Almost.
Yeah, that actually brings to my point. Like, do you get instances where the needs of one child are conflicting with the needs of another child? Like, maybe a young person stims with certain noise and another young person is really, really sensitive to that noise. And how do you manage that?
I think
in therapeutic practice, we don't just take what the school gives us. We take it, you know, we have to be able to adjust the groups as we go along, because it's not fixed. It can't fit in with a curriculum or with their timetable. If the aim of it is to be valuable to them, it has to be flexible.
I guess I've got a specific person in mind who, if it's not one person, you'll move them into another group and they'll find another person to fixate on, and then you find another person, like,
one-to-one.
Okay,
So in our community, we actually work together with our young people to make an approach for supporting young people when they're struggling. It's called the Nest approach. If you go on Facebook and type in Spectrum Gaming, I actually uploaded it last night, so it's free for anyone to sort of read and look at. And it's
say it again.
The Nest approach. So sorry, it's Spectrum Gaming. If you search it on Facebook or Twitter, it'll come up. And it covers this idea of when people have a sort of clash when we have different needs, and it comes to. I think it's not just autism specific, but it's for everyone. So I really believe in what's called neural harmony, which sort of says everyone has brains that sort of think and process work in different ways. And rather than having a setting that's set up to work for one neurotype, it's about having the right level of compromise so that it works for everyone. And the approach is like a step-by-step thing of hearing one person and hearing their sort of needs and their wants, sharing that with the other people, because often one of the issues is people don't understand someone's behaviour, so they react to it negatively, and simply explaining it can be really, really helpful. And then sharing each other's perspectives then enables you to work together to then come up with that meaningful compromise, which might not be perfect for everyone, but it's enough to sort of make everyone feel comfortable.
I'm just going to interject that the word community, when you are able to work long term with a group and they have that community, you're able to work like that. And all the children know each other, and we just do exactly what you do, and they give each other space and support. It's hard if you're working one-to-one.
I just wanted to just say really quickly that I work with a group, been working with them for 4 years. They come in and out, a great big beautiful cocktail of people. And the other day we were doing a tour with a family who were coming to see if it was right for the whole family, and the child was having a meltdown when they arrived, and just one of our team went into the forest school while I took the family down to the pond and just told the children what was happening, and they were really sensitive to noise right now, and we could hear them quieten down as they saw us coming in, and just having that mix of children who are really able to quickly change to welcome somebody in. It was just beautiful. It's so nice. Yeah, that long-term approach.
Yeah, so conflicting access needs is something that I think we don't talk about enough. And there are ways of managing them, but conflicts absolutely will occur. This is why whenever I see like a venue that claims to be 100% accessible, it's like, no, you've not understood accessibility. There is no 100%. There are people whose needs are just not compatible with other people. And yeah, maybe they just need to not be in the same space. Or maybe they can understand, once they understand what's going on, they might be able to adjust their behaviour or their reactions accordingly. I don't know how many of you have seen Pablo on BBC TV, but it's a lovely cartoon about a young autistic kid and his internal life. And his internal life is like a cast of autistic animals, all with very different experiences and approaches to things. So quite a lot of it is about like working through how to reconcile the needs of like Tang the orangutan, who's all over the place and obviously ADHD as well as autistic, with Mouse, who really likes the quiet. It's very important. So I recommend that highly. I mean, it's aimed at small kids, but I thoroughly enjoy it. Speaking of age-appropriateness.
Right, guys, we haven't got very long left.
True.
And we've got 3 questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you what our 3 questions are, and you can decide what to put to the panel and any other questions, really. So the other things that we were going to discuss was, although Forest School wasn't developed as an intervention or a therapy, it is used quite often for young people in crisis. Would you like any advice from the panel about that? The other 2 things we were going to discuss was about should we include neurodiversity in level 3 training, and if people think it's a good idea, what are the practical and ethical considerations of trying to co-produce that with neurodivergent people? And then the other thing was talking about the fact that the Forest School community has always had lots of neurodivergent practitioners. And how can trainers make sure that their training is going to be the best it can be for the different neurodivergent people who may be coming to be trained as Forest School practitioners? So that was our ideas, but I'm just going to kind of throw it open now, and you can ask the guys which ones or anything else you want to say.
Open floor then.
We've got like 15 minutes, so take it where you want to now.
Can I
from what
just
we've just
say
suggested.
that the neurodiversity in training for level 3 Forest School instructors, there is the therapeutic Forest School that's done up in Manchester.
And
no,
is the
not
person
Manchester.
who talks about
It's in Manchester.
Well, that was really good. I've done that. It was really good.
Yeah.
And it's just an extension to level 3.
Additional CPD could be looked as.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think like I'm thinking about Italy because I really don't know how it is here level 3, but I think it's important to start reasoning beyond the idea of adding something. I like to really think that neurodiversity is a topic that should be included in a transversal way across all other topics for 2 reasons, one theoretical and one practical. I think that when we start reasoning and accepting that groups are neurodiverse, this immediately change the way in which we see all children, because we start accepting that they experience, perceive, interact with the world in a different way, and this changes the way in which we can support their risk assessment or the way in which we plan and project about our base camp. Everything changes when we accept this. So it changes the way in which we theorize and think about learning. And so to simply add something else, it brings us to the idea that there are additional or special needs.
Cosmetic.
Instead, I think that at least is what I'm trying to do in Italy, is to introduce the word unexpected needs, because this brings responsibility on the shoulder of adults and practitioners who really need to enlarge their vision, and this is their responsibility. And so we can do this, changing the whole structure of training.
Unexpected needs. I like that.
I think one of the issues with courses like with Therapeutic Forest, while it's really great, is so I'm one of the guest speakers on my course, but everyone who goes along is really passionate and motivated to learn about that. And the same with this conference. It's been really inspiring listening to everyone, but not every forest school leader's here. So whether we like it or not, I think there are people who aren't as confident with supporting neurodivergent learners at forest school. And it would be epic if there was a way that everyone had that foundation, not just for people who are passionate enough to come to things like this. But,
I agree. I would personally love to see that as part of the course. I wish it had been part of my course, because our experience over the last sort of 7 to 8 years has been lots of families with neurodivergent children seek us out because they're really searching for something which is going to meet their child's needs and where they're going to be happy and learn in a way that they want to and feel accepted and all of those things that we all need. So, you know, I've got a list of as long as my arm of kids that would love to come and join, you know, exactly for those reasons. But also I think because of the way that forest school works, and you are going on sort of intrinsic motivation, and children are following their own sort of needs and wants and interests, and they're playing, maybe, you know, we do sort of see, you're sort of seeing a little bit what's going on underneath for the child, in a way that maybe in a more rules-based task-focused setting, you know, that can be really hidden and masked, and that child, you know, you may sort of spot things that is sort of helpful for them to know, that helpful for their family to know, but, you know, we're not sort of psychologists, and we're sort of, you know, our knowledge is kind of limited. So I think if we truly want to sort of advocate for that child and know them and know, you know, and you know, have an environment where they can get to know themselves and advocate for themselves, then I think we definitely need to know more and have more discussions like this, because it's just an absolutely inevitable part of our work. It's like a sort of a magnet, really, in every way. So yeah, I would love that, and if that ever did become a course module, I would love the opportunity to then go and do that module now, because I've already done my training. I'm not going to do it again, but if I could add that on, that would be amazing.
That's pretty much what the Therapeutic Forest offers you, that opportunity to do an add-on module, as it were. It's not called that, but that's essentially what it is. And I think it's also important to remember that forest school is, in reality, still quite a developing science.
Yeah.
And when the course was written and when these guys put it together 10, 12, whatever years ago, nobody thought, you know what, this is going to be a really ideal way to work with neurodivergent people. That's something that's happened as a byproduct, a side effect, and especially when you start working with older kids. I work with a lot of teens, and none of them are mainstream. They've all come to me because they're somewhere, you know. And so I think, yeah, it's really important to look at the course itself and go, this is the way it's developed. How can we update the course to meet the current need?
I think part of this comes back to that why rather than what thing again, right? Like, so much of what is taught in forest school courses is great for neurodivergent kids. If it was just like pointed out that part of the reason why it's so important for kids to have the opportunity of like learner-led experiences and autonomy is that neurodivergent kids don't get that chance in day-to-day life, and it is incredibly valuable for them. You know, it's just something to bear in mind when you're learning about those things which you are going to be learning anyway.
And what you're saying is having it included in the content rather than a standalone module.
Yeah.
Which makes much more
Yeah.
sense. So,
Holistic.
That,
Maybe both.
The why put alongside the current rather than this is the bit for those people.
May I just say something on the qualification front? Mel over there, just gives away now. And I are part of the endorsed trainers group within the FSA. And within the FSA also there's an awarding organisations forum. So the two talk to each other. And all of the organisations across the country who are offering the qualification that is recognised by the FSA or one that has parity, all of those qualifications are revisited every 5 years. And so there's been a recent look and a tweak because it takes a huge amount of work. And over the next few years, there'll be all sorts of consultation because the endorsed trainers and the awarding organisations and the wider forest school community, you know, not just the FSA, but there's thousands of people doing amazing practice who are not yet choosing to be part of the FSA, and they may never do, that we're actually consulting with them. So these brilliant people, they've already been giving so much, and we're at that point where the next lot of talking and thinking is being added in. And that was, you know, Sarah said in her talk, it's over to us. Well, it is over to us. All these brilliant things you're all saying and thinking, and that Michael's been writing about, and Fergus and Stefania and Andy are teaching people and sharing, all of that is part of the next bit. So you sitting under this oak tree, it's like these little acorns, let's say looking at these acorns, and you're the seeds, we're all the seeds for this next iteration of the qualification, quality training, quality practice and all of that.
And it's also in the community already, there are lots of neurodivergent practitioners.
Yeah.
And it's recognising everything that you as a neurodivergent practitioner can bring to the community, and by sharing your experience and being involved in how these things are built, they'll be better. Because you listen to the panel today, and I think it should be evident to everybody that the only way to really learn about neurodiversity is to listen to neurodivergent people.
So you had your hand up for quite a while, sorry.
I've forgotten now, but I was actually thinking you do your level 3 training, and that is like, that's your foundation. And then if you're immersed in what you're doing and delivering, you want to go out and explore. And so our practice has just mine and sharing with people and talking. And it is, I think you said, it can be quite a narrow place. You don't get to talk to people and share practice and things like that. But equally with the training to bring in more of the newer research and things that I've gone out and learned through just talking to people like you guys, and then going looking it up and exploring different ways of working just with people, because I think everything you do to facilitate for the neurodiverse community benefits everybody else. And that hasn't just been for forest school, it's
woman with the blanket.
So I'm maybe changing subjects.
Yeah,
a little
make
bit.
it loaded.
Sorry, but my question is, I'm very early on in my journey for a school. But if one was to start their own practice, like obviously you want inclusion, so you want everyone to be together, regardless of any differences. But at the same time, I'm hearing that it's kind of good to have specialised groups for neurodivergent people, that they can come together and build their own community. So my question is it to keep them as a separate group, or to have them included in the main, like not necessarily mainstream, but just so what is, or do you do both? I see that there's a bit of a conflict here actually.
It's not a conflict, we do both, because some people prefer, it's not a conflict, it's that we do offer both, because some people want their kids mixing, or the kids are comfortable mixing
Just
with
quite
others,
happy.
and others, they feel more comfortable when they know that other kids are going to be...
Like our colleague here was saying, that sometimes, you can't,
So you offer both?
Yeah.
Okay,
You've got to do what works for your group.
what
So
works
I've
for the
got
group.
3 kids in my group that are neurodiverse, but they just piss each other off. They're always fighting, and there's nothing we can do
But
about
then,
it.
neurotypical ones, I've had punch-ups, so, you know, it's like, yep.
It's okay, because I don't want to say, oh, then I'm not inclusive.
I think when you have a group for just autistic people, that also has extra benefits that a lot of other places don't necessarily have. So about 4 years ago, about a year after I was diagnosed, I set up a board game group for autistic adults. That was the first time ever I could be in a room, I could just rant about things, and then rather than having to explain why I'm ranting about it in the context of being autistic, everyone else just nodded their heads and understood, and you don't really get that anywhere else. And the other thing as well is most of our staff team are autistic. We have a volunteer who's absolutely amazing. She's not autistic, she's a clinical psychologist, and she sent me some reflections after attending a few sessions, and she said sometimes she feels like quite out of her comfort zone, because she can see everyone connect, and she can see that really strong sense of belonging, and she can see like people are socialising and acting in a sort of artistic way, if that makes sense. And she said she's out of her comfort zone because she can see it's not really her space, and she said actually that makes me realise what it must be like to be autistic in a world where the majority isn't autistic, and having that one safe space where you can be your authentic self, where you're accepted, is really, really important and really, really powerful.
Autistic spaces don't necessarily have to be exclusively autistic spaces. I think that's...
We've got Lady in Red, and we've got Mel.
Training, just really quickly, I'm really early on in my journey. I've got to go and write the portfolio when I leave here and carry on with it. I'm finding that really hard. So I'm just wondering, that part of your training, I think, I have someone who's helping me who's neurodiverse. It's amazing. I know that puts her off doing the training, what's expected of you, and I just wonder, is that adapted in different ways to attract the very people you want to deliver for a school?
So I started doing training with Sarah, which I couldn't do because just for distance. So we started doing it online. Online, I said some of the difficulties I have with executive functioning, difficulties with lots of writing, and said, which was absolutely brilliant when you said as an alternative you can do sort of videos and evidence it and share sort of reflection logs and that sort of stuff. That is absolutely perfect and shows the exact same knowledge without the barriers that writing lots of stuff has. Like I said, the only reason I didn't complete it was because of location, and it's expensive to go and attend the practical sessions, but having adaptations like that would be amazing for getting more neurodivergent learners to become forest school leaders. So ask Sarah, because it was perfect.
For me, I haven't quite finished my level 1 training because I needed to organise an observation. And between like executive functioning difficulties and like resistance to social networking, I just haven't been able to. I mean, it doesn't help that I work on Friday afternoons, and in Scotland practically all of the forest schools run on Friday afternoons, but
Mine's just a real quick question. Research. What research is actually taking place about forest school? Could be anything. What research is taking place, and how can we tap into it or
start our own, or?
So, not enough, but getting better. Rather than me on the panel today, we're hoping it would be Sam Friedman, who at the moment is studying for a PhD at Cambridge, and she's specialising in autism at Forest School. That's what her PhD work is about. So it is slowly happening.
Is there a place where we can tap into it?
FSA website.
FSA website, yeah.
The FSA website's got Sam's
Paper came out just a couple of weeks ago, didn't it? And I shared it kind of online in Forest School Facebook groups. There's a Forest School Discord group.
Forest School
Discord group.
Michael, do you think we should put that in the bulletin?
Yes.
Shall we do that next week?
Yeah.
We're on a mission.
Yes. I can put it in the WhatsApp group as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, the Autism
Brilliant.
Forest School Discord has been really useful.
The Forest School and Autism Discord group. Sarah really needs to be given loads of credit for how instrumental she's been in creating a platform, welcoming all these kind of discussions into the FSA, and all of this has grown out really out of Sarah facilitating those opportunities for us, and I'd like to take this opportunity to give you the credit you deserve for that.
Well, thank you.
And the Forest School Discord group came out of Zoom meetings that originally were set up by Sarah and facilitated by Sarah, and so I think all of the panellists here are on the Forest School and share loads of links. Fergus is the king of links. Is that okay to call you that, Fergus?
Sorry?
The king of links, is that okay? But you will learn just absolutely loads. Also, monotropism, Fergus set up a website, monotropism.org. Every Forest School practitioner should look at the resources on that website. Thank you.
Have we got time for one?
Yeah.
5 past.
Well, it's up to you guys, really. We're kind of meant to get out.
Yeah,
of the
we're
way,
meant
but
to.
I don't mind
Yeah.
carrying on.
But Mel, you had your hand up, but then
it's gone.
He's gone. Right. Okay. So, are we happy that we have, let's say, started? Yes. Yes. So I've got to say thank you to all the panel.
Thank you.
That's
Stefania.
lovely. It's been great.
They've travelled miles and miles and miles.
And it's great to hear authentic voices, and that's the thing. Thank you to you lot. As Sarah said, it's over to you. This little gathering here could be as significant to moving on a new area or a new direction for Forest School in general, as the meetings those 10 years ago and 30 years ago. So I mean that would be great. So thank you all. I hope you've enjoyed it. Big round of applause. And the next bit is back in the hall, so a big tent.